Check out what New Orleans Saints defensive end Carl Granderson had to say about how the Saints' improved offense is helping to improve the defense as well. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to discuss why Bub Means could end up developing into an impact player for the New Orleans Saints. We're going to dive into three specific places that the New Orleans Saints defense needs to improve going into 2024. And to kick us all off, Carl Granderson, New Orleans Saints defensive end, explains how the New Orleans Saints' new offense is helping to make the defense better and why defenses should be afraid of Taysom Hill. We got all that and much more for you coming up on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for being an everydayer and for making us your first listen of the day every day here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets just for winning a $5 bet. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. New Orleans Saints defensive end Carl Granderson was fantastic on the podium the other day as we wrapped up week 3 of New Orleans Saints OTAs. And one of the big things that he really dove into was how the New Orleans Saints new offense is also impacting and making better the New Orleans Saints defense. And this was one of those byproducts that we were hoping was going to be the case with the addition of new offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak. And it certainly looks to be actually working out. It's actually happening. So let's take a look at it a little bit more here. Here's what Carl Granderson had to say about the challenge that is presented to or not necessarily a challenge, but what the benefit of having this new offense and its challenges is for the New Orleans Saints defense.
It's impacting the defense a lot because, throughout the year, we see a lot of teams similar to their offense that they're doing now. So they're getting us right, and we playing fast, and they're coming off the ball. And we just making each other better by competing every day and just trying to make offense and defense better.
I love the comment, they're just getting us right. You know what I mean? Because it shows an awareness that there is a place for this defense to continue to improve. The defense has been the story of the New Orleans Saints since 2017, right? That's kind of been low-key its identity. Now, I know that, there's years of that to where 2018 in particular, Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, those were the story of the New Orleans Saints. That was the lifeblood of the New Orleans Saints, along with phenomenal years of Alvin Kamara, of course, involved in that 2018 itself included. But the one thing you knew that you could always kind of rest your laurels on with this team was its defense. And if we're being honest, the defense has taken a couple of steps back, particularly in one area that typically is the run game area, but it is more specific than that, which we're going to dive into here in a little bit. But yeah, I do think that there's value here in terms of, the speed of this New Orleans Saints offense. The Saints having to practice against an offense that replicates what's happening around today's NFL. You heard Carl Granderson say that what they're doing in practice right now, OTAs, minicamp, all that, it reflects what's happening around the NFL. That didn't used to be the case, right? We always talked about over the course of the past 2 seasons, the Saints not running what felt like a modern offense. And we've broken down some of the things. A lot of what the New Orleans Saints are trying to do going into next year replicates what we're seeing the San Francisco 49ers do. As an example of that, 21 personnel, right? 2 running backs, 1 tight end, having more of those type sets. Trying to run multiple plays out of the exact same look. Derek Carr highlighted that. That's something that the Los Angeles Rams are known for. The inclusion of multiple tight ends and a lot more of those types of sets. That replicates what the NFL is doing as a whole. The 2023 was the most 12 personnel or 2 tight end sets run in the NFL since 2016. So we're seeing the New Orleans Saints and the things that they're doing go with the trends of the best offenses in the NFL. And now the trends that the offenses around the league are also kind of blazing, or the trails, I guess, that they're blazing as well. Now, Carl Granderson didn't stop just at the general idea of how the offense challenges. I also asked him, what happens to a defensive line when Taysom Hill is involved in a play and lines up in a bunch of different areas? Here's what he had to say about Taysom.
Man, Taysom play, he do it all. That's crazy because after practice, I'm like, boy, you all over the field, but, he's a heck of a player. And, he could play running back, tight end, quarterback, his receivers. I seen him in front of me and I'm like, bro, what you doing out here? You in the wrong position. So I'm pretty sure it's hard for the secondary because, they got to see the formation, and then one play he might be in the backfield, and then next thing you know, he might be lined up at the Z receiver. So, Taysom, he's a special weapon, and I'm excited for the offense to see what they're going to do with him this year.
So he talked about a little bit there too, how it impacts the secondary, but I imagine from the defensive line standpoint, it can be a little bit tricky understanding exactly how to play against the Taysom Hill. And I think part of what makes it so challenging for a defensive line isn't necessarily where he lines up during the play, like once they come out of the huddle. I think the real challenge for a lot of defensive lines takes place while the team is in the huddle and number 7 is in that huddle. Because you're trying to figure out, okay, well, is he going to come out and be a quarterback? Is he back there calling the play? But also I'm trying to pay attention to what's going on around me. Is Derek Carr calling the play? But then will Derek Carr eventually motion from out of the backfield and then Taysom Hill motion into the backfield? Like there's so many of those little things. And then if Taysom Hill is in the backfield, you have to, in which we've seen a lot over the course of OTAs, whether it be at fullback or even just as the lone shotgun running back next to Derek Carr, is he going to run a route? Are they going to hand it off to him? Are they going to pitch it out to him? Is it going to be a stretch run? Or are they going to hand it to him only for him to throw it to somebody else? Like there's a lot of those other little pieces as well. So even from a defensive line having to be ready with its run fits, right? It creates a challenge seeing Taysom Hill in the huddle and then eventually seeing where Taysom Hill lines up. And then there's a whole, network of, complications that then come from that because of all the questions that you have to ask. The thing that I keep saying about Taysom Hill on this show, if you haven't heard me say it already, is that no longer are the Saints fans going to be the ones asking, where's Taysom Hill? It will be the defenses that are lining up across from Taysom Hill going, where's Taysom Hill? Because when fans were asking, where's Taysom Hill? It typically wasn't for the right reasons, right? It was because, he had a great game and then all of a sudden he was gone the next 2 or 3. It doesn't sound like that's going to be the case with this version of the New Orleans Saints offense. So those are a couple of different things that he kind of dove into. He talked about the speed of the offense as well and how challenging that can be and is, and how the defense, it's kind of an iron sharpen iron type of approach. So loved hearing all that. I have one more for you from Carl Granderson. It doesn't really have to do with the offense that lines up across from him, but instead the player this year that could be lining up opposite him on that defensive line in Chase Young.
Man, I'm excited, man. I can't wait till he get healthy, man. I've been watching films and he's real talented, so I'm excited. He should be coming back pretty soon. So, him on the other side, he could play a little bit of inside too. So we're going to have some dogs out there. We got me, Cam, Chase. We got some, we're going to hook up some schemes up. So I'm just excited for everybody just to come. And then we got Camp in Cali, and we're just going to get after it.
Obviously, a big addition in Carl Granderson's eyes, adding Chase Young. But the value of adding Chase Young doesn't need to only impact the pass rush side of things, where the Saints really do need a boost, but also he's got to be able to contribute in the run game, and in particular, not allow the offensive line to win the line of scrimmage. That's one of the 3 really specific places where we're looking at the New Orleans Saints defense to improve. Let's dive into that and the other 2 big ones. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. It's summertime, so it's all about the MLB and, of course, the NBA Finals as they continue to roll on, and, of course, so much more. And you can bet on it all over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers will get $200 in bonus bets by winning a $5 bet. So go and find a heavy favorite somewhere or a team that you know is going to struggle. Like later on today, you've got the San Diego Padres taking on the Oakland A's. The Oakland A's have been hapless. Of course, we're not even sure where they're going to be playing in the future, but 1.5 point favorites right now are the Padres. To me, that's a good place to jump in. And then you win that bet. That's $200 in bonus bets you can use on everything from finals MVP to who's going to hit a game-winning shot to who's going to hit it out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make sure you get a big win to enter the summer. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints defense have 3 specific areas, and I'm talking specific areas here. We're going to dive deep on this one in terms of how they can improve in 2024. And for me, it all starts with resetting the line of scrimmage. We appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today. If you're tired of those other networks yelling and screaming, having to turn the volume down, all that other stuff, make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today, which is free on YouTube. And you're going to be able to get all the biggest stories from the local experts that know the teams that are in those biggest stories the best, know them like the back of their hands, making sure that you've got everything covered. So make sure you go check it out today. Locked On Sports Today. You can find it for free on YouTube and also on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The New Orleans Saints have kind of a fundamental starting place for where they need to improve in 2024. And look, when I'm talking about this team's specific elements that needs to be improved, I'm not just talking about like the run game, coverage, play, defending play action, things like that. I'm looking a little bit more kind of in depth here. So I got 3 of them here for you. I could make this 5. I might actually have some other ones that I'll throw in here as well. But I want to start off with resetting the line of scrimmage, especially with the zone run offenses that go across the NFL. So here's what I mean when I talk about resetting the line of scrimmage. When I talk about resetting the line of scrimmage, let's say that let's say the Saints kick a touchback, which now going into 2024 would mean the opposing offense starting on the 35. All right, so they're starting on the 35. If on 1st and 10, the Carolina Panthers set up, they're on the 35. They snap the ball, turn around, hand the ball off to the line of scrimmage, or hand the ball off to the running back. By the time that the running back crosses the offensive line can either have moved forward a couple of yards, stayed on the line of scrimmage, or been pushed back a couple of yards. And for the Saints, it has to be that in 2024, we're seeing a lot more of the second and third options. Either the line of scrimmage is where the point of attack ends up being, right? To where, and I'm calling the point of attack where the running back crosses through its offensive line and enters where defenders would have the opportunity to make a stop. Or the Saints defensive line needs to win the push at the line of scrimmage and walk the offensive line backwards so that the running back is not gaining yards before contact, right? Before they cross that line of scrimmage, before they cross that offensive line, defensive line, get through the trenches, if the defense is pushing and walking those offensive linemen back, they have the ability to make a big stop in those cases, okay? And that stop can be a no gain, that stop can be a tackle for a loss, whatever it might be. So it's not just about penetrating that offensive line. It's not just about getting through the protection and getting past folks. It's, can you move those offensive line backwards so that you're winning at the line of scrimmage? So if the Saints are able to do that, I think that they're going to be in a much better place. And they don't have to do that every single snap. It would be unreasonable to expect that every single run defense snap, but it's certainly something that they're going to need help with. And that will definitely make them better. And I think that them going against an offensive line now in practices that wants to move off the ball, they're getting a better idea of how to reset that line of scrimmage against a mobile offensive line. The Saints ran a lot of inside zone when they did run those zone runs. So they're not getting off the ball and trying to get up to the second level. They're not trying to get out, not even outside the numbers, but outside the hashes and things like that in those scenarios from the past 2 seasons. Now, the New Orleans Saints offensive line is absolutely moving laterally that way. So now the defensive line gets more and more reps to get comfortable with that and how to move those offensive linemen while they're on the move. So I think to me, that is a big one. Reset the line of scrimmage, win the run game, improve your run defense. Number 2, defending crossers in the middle of the field. And I think that this one is pretty simple. We've seen the New Orleans Saints struggle with this. That's kind of the one area where pass coverage has not been at its strongest, is when a team makes a concerted effort, a la the Houston Texans last year. You could also look at elements of this against the Indianapolis Colts last season, the Jacksonville Jaguars last season, a lot of those AFC South teams, mostly coincidentally. But defending the middle of the field has been a bit of an issue from time to time. And it's been the place where if the Saints passing defense, which very rarely gets carved up, but when it does get carved up, it's typically because of crossing routes, conflict defense in the middle of the field, things like that, or creating conflict defenders. And when I talk about creating a conflict defender, I mean putting one defender in a situation to where they have to choose, am I going to drop back to cover this in the, this route in the middle of the field that's in the intermediate area, or am I going to come down to try to defend the short catch and run opportunity over the middle of the field? And then basically whichever one that defender chooses, the quarterback goes to the other one. So tough stuff like that. So I would say that the reason why the Saints are getting some help with that now is because the offense for New Orleans, this new offense with Klint Kubiak and all the work that Andrew Janocko is doing with these quarterbacks, New Orleans Saints quarterbacks coach, they've been targeting the middle of the field a lot. They've been targeting the middle of the field, it feels like, in OTAs more than we've seen them target the middle of the field in previous years and stuff. So I think that ends up helping them out quite a bit. And then related to that, but still to me, a separate point, goes to number 3 here, which is second level coverage. Okay. Now this is related to attacking the middle of the field, because a lot of times when you're a linebacker, you are covering the middle of the field, but also a lot of times you're being pulled out to the flats, to the outside, because you're defending a running back that's running a route out into that area, or a tight end that's running out on an arrow towards the outside, things like that, or even pivot routes, stuff like that. So I think that the way that guys like Pete Werner, Demario Davis, Willie Gay, or the way that the team gets better here is because Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Willie Gay are seeing that in practices, right? The Saints are using their running backs in that way. They're using their tight ends in that way. They're attacking all over the place with those guys that typically linebackers would cover. The Saints also get better there just by virtue of simply having added Willie Gay to the picture, right? Who is a really good coverage linebacker, extremely fast player at the second level, sideline to sideline, like legitimately sideline to sideline coverage ability, all those other things. So I think they're being helped out there, and also helped themselves there with the offseason acquisition of Willie Gay. Okay, good. I have a little bit of extra time here for this segment, so I'm going to give you 4 and 5. I'm not going to go into as much detail, but number 4, defending the play action, mobile quarterbacks, rollouts, stuff like that. Obvious how the Saints are getting help there. That's simply because of the fact that they are seeing it in practice, right? So they're getting a little bit more accustomed to that. I think as a part of that, you're also training and fixing the eye discipline issues we have seen every now and then. They've gotten better in that area big time, especially with Marcus Robertson at defensive backs coach, but I think that ends up getting aided in that area too. And then finally, and the Saints won't have a way to get better at this. They simply will not have a way to get better at this until they get out on the field, tackling. Okay. Early season tackling. Let me be more specific. Early season tackling, and maybe a couple of mid-season tackling issues too. Jacksonville Jaguars last year. Not being able to tackle in practice, I think, is one of the things that harms NFL players the most. They don't know how to get tackled by the time that they get into the season, and they struggle with tackling by the time they get into the season. It's one of the more short-sighted things I think the NFLPA has fought for, are those non-contact practices. I understand sometimes that tackling in practices could lead to injuries, but not tackling in practices, I think, leads to injuries as well. Maybe that's just my personal opinion, but I don't understand how you're training, how you're properly getting these players ready for the season without them being able to hit each other. Like, how are you getting them ready to hit each other if they're not going to be hitting each other? And with the potential addition of an 18th game, and therefore reduction of a preseason to like a game or 2 games, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. So to me, that's a big one too, but that's not one that I can pinpoint and say, oh, hey, this new offensive system is helping there, because they can't tackle in practice. But definitely something that the New Orleans Saints will need to be on top of. So there, promised you 3, gave you 5. There's your land yap. Coming up next, let's take a look at why Bub Means could end up having a big impact for the New Orleans Saints with an assist from PFF's Sam Monson. Got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Fifth round rookie wide receiver Bub Means out of Pittsburgh is somebody that I've talked about having a growing role more than likely in his rookie year, just by looking at the track record of New Orleans Saints rookie wide receivers, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, Deontay Hardy, at that time Harris. We've seen it all before, and I think we might see it again with fifth round rookie wide receiver Bub Means. And I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that thinks that way. So let's continue on with today's episode here. As we wrap it up, I want to also make sure that I say to you, thank you very much for checking out today's episode. Don't forget that we are your team every day. So we'll be back tomorrow. On tomorrow's episode, I want to go over what it is that we want to see from Marshawn Lattimore, New Orleans Saints cornerback, as well as running back Alvin Kamara during mandatory mini camps. And a big part of what I want to see is Alvin Kamara's usage in an offense that feels like it's been tailor-made for him. So very excited to be out there for 3 days of mandatory mini camps here, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we'll preview that for tomorrow morning's episode. All right, so last week I spoke with PFF lead NFL analyst Sam Monson at PFF_Sam, if you want to check him out on your favorite social media. And we broke down sort of how the New Orleans Saints got an A+ in their draft grade, a little bit of like how Spencer Rattler could potentially impact this team in the future, like what his future looks like. We talked a bit about Taliese Fuanga moving over to left tackle. So all of that is in an episode from last week. But I wanted to bring some more stuff. I had some additional conversation with him, and I asked him which of the players in this 2024 draft class could end up having a bigger than expected impact, even if not in their rookie year. And Sam Monson pointed out Pittsburgh wide receiver Bub Means. So let him explain why.
I don't know if it's going to be year one, but I think a couple of day 3 picks they had that I really like. Bub Means, the wide receiver from Pittsburgh, and then Khristian Boyd, the Northern Iowa defensive tackle. Bub Means is a guy that, like, his average depth of target in Pittsburgh was like 17 or 18 yards downfield. They basically only let him run deep. And it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it does make you a lot easier to defend because corners know you don't have to defend a bunch of things. Like, he's not going to break this route off at 12 yards and run a dig route. I don't have to worry about that. I only have to focus on running deep, breaking it off for the comeback, or the sort of hitch routes or the underneath stuff. So it makes those guys much easier to defend. And despite that, Means still had really good, impressive plays in college. His quarterback was not, I think, a high-level guy in terms of some of the throws sent his way were not even vaguely accurate. And then you saw him at the combine. He ran well, really impressed, showed some extremely high-level athleticism just in terms of measurables. He's definitely, like, as a day 3 guy, he was one of the people I had circled as a great sleeper prospect and somebody that could make an impact.
Big sleeper prospect, says Sam Monson, and he's somebody that's very high on Bub Means. And I want to highlight something that he talked about. He talked about him being easy to defend in college because of his route tree, but still being able to produce despite that. So that could sound like a little bit of a criticism of Bub Means, but it's not. It really isn't. And this, to me, I thought was a really brilliant point because we see this from a lot of wide receivers in today's college to NFL transition that aren't playing for like Ohio State, where you have to be able to run a route tree. Hello, Garrett Wilson and Michael Thomas and Chris Olave, of course. Like, all these guys, as they were coming out, outside of a couple of analysts here and there, looked at them as top guys route tree wise, as well as expansive route tree wise. And Bub Means just isn't looked at that way because, as Sam highlighted, he was asked to run a lot of goes, a lot of hitches, a lot of comebacks, right? And those were kind of the things. Not a lot of breaking into the middle of the field. Not a lot of more sophisticated routes like pivots to where you're kind of, pushing up field, but then breaking inside before you turn over one of your shoulders to actually cut 90 degrees to the outside or 45 degrees to the outside, run perpendicular to the outside, out of bounds boundary, all those other things. He wasn't asked to do things like that, but he's going to be asked to do that here in New Orleans because you have to run a full route tree in this type of system. Even though this type of system, the wide zone system, is not terribly dissimilar from what was being run over in Pittsburgh. But at the NFL level, you're using a lot more route combinations. You're running a lot more routes. You're being asked to do all those things. And I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, he's being asked to do those things now because we're seeing it in OTAs. He's being asked to attack the middle of the field. Is he being asked to run down the sideline, be faster than the guy in front of him every now and then? Oh, absolutely. And 100%, he should be asked to do that because typically he will be faster than the guy in front of him, especially as he matures into the NFL game speed over the course of the next couple of years. So yeah, you keep asking him to do that, but he add a little bit to his repertoire, and we're seeing that already. So I do think that Bub Means is somebody that we should not count out as having a bit of an impact his rookie season. I think it'll grow. His role will grow throughout the year, and so maybe he can get into that conversation. But most importantly, grow into having a bigger impact later on during his time here in New Orleans. The Saints are set to have, if all these guys pan out the way that Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed have, but you've got A.T. Perry and you've got Bub Means, you could have that core of 4 for a little while. We heard Drew Brees talk about that not too long ago, not to really like compare these guys to those guys, but we heard Drew Brees talk about that not too long ago, about having the same 4 wide receivers for multiple years. Marcus Colston, Lance Young, Robert Meacham, Devery Henderson. Those guys overlapped for a lot of years together with their quarterback. And so if you have that wide receiver core where your oldest wide receiver out of that core of 4 right now is just now going into his 3rd season, or 2 of them now going into their 3rd seasons in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, that certainly helps you out quite a bit for your future as you start to, figure out who your long-term solution is going to be at quarterback, which is still, I imagine, a couple of years away for this team. All right, so next up, I just wanted to make sure I got this in there as well, because he did mention Christian Boyd. So I wanted to go a step further in terms of how Christian Boyd ends up potentially impacting this team, and some pretty good stuff here as well from Sam.
Abe's amazing. The kind of production is there. Obviously, the level of competition is a lot lower, and he's one of a number of guys this year where I think there were a lot of these players on day 3 where they had a bunch of sort of what would normally be red flags as a prospect, but this might simply be the new reality of a draft world where NIL is a factor, where COVID was a thing, and a lot of guys had an extra year. Yeah. So you're getting these kind of older prospects that have had long college careers, and didn't necessarily break out until later in those careers. Those are all things normally that scare NFL teams and say, these are things we don't want. Like if he needed all these things to go his way for him to show good play, he's probably not a really high level player. But there's so many of them now because of COVID and because of NIL that I think it's just a different world now. And a guy like Christian Boyd, I think, is one where you roll the dice on that guy now because the play was there eventually. It maybe required some of these things going his way to get there, but he did get there. And there's definitely some impressive disruptive play on his tape.
So I love this too, because I'm never mad at experience for a player. And Sam's right. Like with the COVID rules, it opened up a lot of opportunities for these guys to spend that extra year in college, mature a little bit more, learn the game a little bit more, take some steps ahead. And so a guy like Christian Boyd, who does have the competition gap coming from you and I to the NFL, New Orleans Saints fans know that gap better than anybody, having watched Trevor Penning struggle with that gap over the course of the past couple of years, hopefully improving in that over the course of training camp in this offseason. But man, having that extra year maybe makes the gap and the leap, maybe it's just a little bit more manageable for a guy like Christian Boyd, where really you just want the athleticism over on the defensive line. And I think you get that with a Christian Boyd. So he's been a lot of fun to watch so far during camp. You're already seeing him make an impact. So could be interesting because I expect he'll be one of 4, maybe 5 defensive tackles to make this roster and see how much he'll be able to contribute to one of the things we talked about earlier, resetting the line of scrimmage and improving in the run game. So watch out for both of these guys to have some impact over the course of their rookie contracts. Let's look at it that way. All right, y'all, we appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we'll be right back. We're here with you tomorrow. If you're looking for a second listen today, Locked On Sports Today, to get all the news from around the world of sports, the biggest stories in 20 to 25 minutes. You can check out the 24/7 stream, which is going all day. You can check out Locked On Pelicans with the one and only Jake Madison and the one and only Caroline Fitton over at Locked On LSU. We appreciate you very much as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. Big shout out to my guy Byron. Big shout out to Patrick as well. And of course, if you need anything else in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you. And then when it comes to Bub memes, Bub me. It's not that hard. He doesn't have a hard name.